Hey guys, Ona Lewis here. Hey, it's African American History Month. Some call it Black History Month, which is fine. So I wanted to talk about Wall Street's history, or the African Americans' history on Wall Street. Believe it or not, it goes way, way back. The first stock certificate, which was issued by the Dutch East India Trading Company in 1609, was issued so that investors could participate in the huge profits from a slave trading vessel. The slave trading was the big business of the day. And as the colonies were forming in the United States, every one of the 13 colonies actually had legalized slavery. Slavery existed in New York, for example, in those colonies that we think of as Yankee or Northern colonies, slavery. And, you know, sadly, while the country did need labor, it didn't have to kidnap people or purchase people. We know that that was wrong, but that was going on. And in fact, African Americans, enslaved African Americans, actually built Wall Street. Yeah, they built the actual wall. It started out as a fence, and then it became a wall as it became more fortified over the years. So African Americans not only cleared the land, but let's even go back further, because the very place that New York stands on now, that harbor, started out as a slave trading port. And there would be no New York, there'd be no Wall Street if there had not been a business of slave trading, providing this unpaid labor, forced unpaid labor for the colonies, the American colonies. And that was one of the key ports where these enslaved humans who had been kidnapped or sold, or, you know, who were there against their will and forced into this, you know, this hellish nightmare called slavery. That's where it began. It started out as what looked like where they were enchained and, you know, beaten and treated horribly. And then, of course, the actual stock exchange grew up out of that trading. Because people who owned slaves could go back to that area and loan out their enslaved humans that they had purchased for the day. And so it was like a flea market with these outdoor tables that grew up over time. And then the New York Stock Exchange was formed as a result of the prosperity of slave trading. So it's important for us to really understand the history of Wall Street and the history and the contributions of African Americans, you know, to building this country. African Americans built the first Trinity Church. You know, they cleared the land for Broadway, what is now Broadway. They cleared the land and built the buildings. They did the construction. The women, such as my ancestors, who my ancestors are from Guinea-Bissau for the most part. And they were part of that whole slave trade system. You know, so The women also did their part in, domesticated types of activities and also working crops. Well, so, the contributions of African Americans, it's a very important contribution. And sadly, so much of American history is, a result of some very bad things that were done. And in fact, this whole culture of trading, it began with slave trading. Even the term trader, evolved because of the slave trader. And, these were people who were less than scrupulous. And this financial exploitation continues today with many African Americans being underpaid and, not being provided, with access to capital in the same way that, our Caucasian citizens, enjoy, or even members of other ethnic groups. It is important that we understand our history, even the painful, ugly history, because it helps us put a lot of these things into context. So when I look at the New York Times and they say, why haven't African Americans been accepted on Wall Street? Well, it wasn't until the mid-1800s that slavery was even abolished. And so we have century after century of, African Americans being viewed as property. And as people that were not supposed to be treated fairly, who were not supposed to be accepted as equals. It was the law even. And so here we are trying to, get over all of that. But, we still have citizens in our country who seem to think that that way of life was okay. I mean, I just saw the Confederate flag, in the capital of the United States, with hundreds of, insurgents who seem to support that ideology of, enslaving humans and, breeding them like animals and selling their children and, raping them and torturing them and all those bad things that happened. So centuries of this kind of treatment, it leaves a mark, and it's left a mark on America. And, it's kind of like watching a train wreck that hasn't come to a stop yet. That's America. It's a train wreck from the standpoint of racial equality. And it doesn't have to be that way. I think we just need to know our history, and that we will do better once we understand it. Because, I think Americans overall are decent people and fair people and believe in justice and the rule of law. And, the kind of history that we have in this country is just, it doesn't meet the mark. It falls far short. So when I see that African Americans are doing well on Wall Street in some ways, but not in others, I do see progress. When I first got when I began my investment career, I never dreamed that I would actually work on Wall Street, but I did. After I graduated from business school, I got a job with a big investment bank, and I worked for several investment banks over the years. Today, when we see so much capital available, excess cash in the capital markets, it just reminds me of, how easy it is for some people to access capital and how difficult it is for others. And, my hope in telling some of this history is that maybe some of those titans who have access to all that capital will make a little more of it available to African American women in particular, and African Americans in general. It would be really nice to see some of that capital flow into the African American community. I'll step off my soapbox, but once again, happy African American History Month.